A Slack Story by James Sherritt. Day 1, San Francisco. A first day in SF, finding the first Slack office, meeting the team, getting started on some work, piecing together the problem to be solved, coffee time. Day 1, 5:30 a.m. in Vancouver. Get up, get moving. Get the taxi to the airport to the flight to San Francisco. All of it a bit bleary. Land mid-morning into glorious sunshine. Hello, California. Get the taxi to the freeway to the office to get started. Onwards to meet the team and hopefully show them and myself that I had some clue about how to succeed with Slack. Slack? Really Slack? Arrive with a deep breath and try to find the door. That first Slack office is worth some description. It was on Clementina, a half street that didn't really go through many intersections, but popped up again here and there in SOMA's grid as a spur line between blocks. The address I had been given led up an accessibility ramp to a glass door. Inside the door was a kitchen with 2 stainless steel tables. One table held snacks and cutting boards and kitchen appliances, a bowl of avocados. The second table held a fully stocked bar of liquor bottles and cocktail tools, a rainbow of liquids. I learned later that day that the pair of tables had come to the company through an auction of goods from a morgue. These were cadaver tables. Through the kitchen was the main work area, a hangar-like cube of space whose ceiling was mostly skylights. The California sun blasted in by 10 a.m., and so the team had stretched a parachute on cords across the center of the cube to diffuse the blinding light. Desks were arranged somewhat orderly in a grid. A meeting area in a corner hosted a futon and a few chairs. Some folks had erected individual umbrellas to shield their screens from the light and glare. I met Cal Henderson, the husband of Rebecca Reeve, who I had worked with before and who had introduced me to Stuart in the first place. Cal was a bright, bearded programmer and the CTO. I met Eric Costello, another bright, bearded programmer whose focus was front-end engineering. I met Miles Grant, a third bright and affable programmer, but without a beard. Later, I would learn each of them was remarkable, both in their respective and intersecting programming specialties, but also in diverse ways. Cal literally wrote the book on PHP programming on the bus ride of his daily commute. Eric had an English degree and had invented ways for websites to dynamically update their interface called DHTML that everyone now used and took for granted. Miles was a ranked swimmer and barbecue chef. The office was bigger than the team needed it to be and had a bit of a haunted feel. In the glitch days, the team had been 3 times as large. In contrast to the empty office space, the people I met had a really nice feel, like a bunch of weirdos bonded through hardship. They had seen some bad days and stuck together. They each had special skills that complemented each other and broad skills that touched their teammates' respective areas of specialization. This overlap gave them a huge surface area of shared understanding to lean on. They knew each other well and could relate and interoperate. The mood was upbeat. The team retained a very strong hope for what they could create together. They were tight, and for good reason. They were very good at what they did, and they really enjoyed their work. Introducing marketing. So what was I there for? I was new and had some new expertise to offer the team. I hoped I had an ability to help them succeed where they had failed in the past. But this was a new product, and it needed to find a new market. Glitch had been a game for consumers to play. Slack was a product for businesses to be productive. We had to learn how to take a business-to-business or B2B software product to market. And soon. The clock was ticking. Like all startups, it was a race against time. Until we found our market, the money and the faith and the energy were all being depleted daily. So we started with a lot of questions. I had questions and doubts about what I could do. the team had much more practical questions about how we could get started. The biggest question we all shared: how were we going to get customers? First up, I wanted to make B2B marketing real and tangible for them. So we did an exercise that gave them some group work. They broke into 3 groups and each independently talked about what was the last thing they had bought online, describe the purchase process. When did they first become aware they had a need or want for the product? When did they first become aware of the product? How did they find the thing they purchased? How did they decide to purchase that thing instead of another thing or nothing? Then we got back together as a full group to review the discussion. I liked to hear their answers about buying software or new computing, but I was far more interested to see how diverse and diffuse their respective purchase processes had been. In our discussion, it became clear that some parts of the decision they each knew. Some parts they had to figure out together. The purchase process proved complex, like they each had a piece of the puzzle, and the puzzle only revealed itself as solvable once all the pieces had been shared. I took some notes, and we started to see some larger patterns emerge on how they purchased things. From those patterns, we started to create a shared understanding of how customer acquisition and conversion could work for our imaginary customers. After all, it had worked on them. Throughout the discussion, I added in some rough ideas from past marketing work that I thought might be applicable for Slack. It was fun to see how those tactics showed up in their purchase journeys too. None of these rough ideas were particularly sexy or groundbreaking, but having them as part of the conversation helped to convey some of the basics of how B2B marketing could work. We talked about public relations, contributed articles, advertising, word-of-mouth marketing, search engine optimization, landing pages, white papers, emails, testimonials, reviews. It all felt a bit like a job interview and a bit like a learning and teaching session, all rolled together. As we talked, the challenge that we faced started to get clearer for me too. What was Slack? To start with, the key question: what was Slack? How could we go to market with a product that people loved but didn't really know how to describe? Would some standard B2B marketing tactics actually work? If so, which ones? In what order? And with what weighting? The portmanteau word freemium had been coined already, but was not yet widely used in B2B software sales. This was 2013. I can't remember if it was a label we used in that discussion that day, but it was certainly the mechanic we started to imagine that would lead our growth. People had to experience Slack to really get it. How could we help get them started? Stuart flitted in and out throughout the day. He clearly had an idea about what he wanted me to accomplish. Yet beyond meeting the team, that goal was a mystery to me. In hindsight, I'd guess that he wanted to show his team there was a new marketing approach to complement their new business software. And he wanted to see if I was up to the job. At the time, I had only a slight idea of how masterful Stuart could already be at some of the marketing tactics I would be responsible for starting. He knew the PR game cold. He was already a very accomplished communicator and storyteller. He had some ideas about how to pitch the product based on conversations he'd had with friends, connections, and warm introductions. He wrote very well. In short, he was going to be my boss, and he was already very good at the things I would need to do. We broke for lunch, and the team rose as individuals, all clearly accustomed to eating together. Through the narrow SOMA streets, we wound to a line of food trucks huddled in the shadow of an underpass. Señor Sisig was the top choice, a Filipino fusion operation with generous portions. I made conversation with my new teammates and went with the recommended option of adding a fried egg to the top of my sisig salad. We trooped back to the office and ate at some vacant desks. I started to get to know the team. We finished up lunch and settled in for another session, this one on measuring our results. We started with something called the R framework. AARRR equals acquisition, activation, retention, referral, revenue, a metrics funnel for startups measuring customer acquisition. Then we moved on to working on some draft positioning statements to start to answer the key question: What is Slack? As we worked on positioning, Stuart appeared and listened in, and then started to participate with one group. We shared back our work to the team, and I still have the notes from that session when everything was wide open and unknown and speculative. No one knew Slack. We didn't even know Slack. Did we answer the key question, what was Slack? Not really. We got closer, but it was still pretty fuzzy. We still had much work to do. We wrapped up, and folks dispersed and settled into some individual work at their desks. I wrote some notes to try to capture the details of our conversation and educate myself. I've included those notes as an appendix at the end of this chapter, if you're interested. They're the real deal from that afternoon, along with some reflections I added in on the flight home. At 3 p.m., everyone rose from their desks at once. Something was happening that was clearly understood by everyone and lost on me. Coffee run. We trooped out together to the California sun and walked a few blocks to a high-end speaker shop that happened to also have a cafe in the back, the team's preferred coffee source. The last thing I remember of that day was leaving the office back to the bright sun. Stuart offered to call me a town car using an app on his phone called Uber. I had never heard of this option or service. As we waited for the car, he explained to me how I wouldn't have to pay when I arrived at the airport. He would be charged for the ride through the app. He had just pushed the button on his screen, and then the town car showed up. It was a bit magical. I got into the car for the return journey home. I remember thinking to myself, okay, I don't know where this is headed, but I'm going to roll with it. Uber, sunshine, Filipino fusion, parachutes, California. Let's go.